Hello. So I was cleaning the bathroom, and this idea came to me about spiritual DNA or lineages that are, uh, I was about to say above and beyond, but just mostly beyond 3D. So I was just thinking of them as sort of spiritual DNA. I was actually mostly having a conversation with Philip Goff in my head about panpsychism, and the other topic that I was thinking about was sort of to do with panpsychism, but also with kind of a consciousness version of the singularity of that maybe like uh or maybe it's not a singularity, but the opportunity that our species has to actually advance another level versus completely kicking ourselves back a couple altogether would be if enough people are what I've been calling awake, for lack of a better term. We'll just say uh, self aware and really grok that the universe, that consciousness is a key element in the universe just as much as, or intrinsically with things like quarks, bosons, all this kind of stuff. We just don't, we haven't put the language together for it, but that consciousness is, uh, I mean, much like gravity is like, yeah, we know it's there. We don't know why. We don't really get it. Well, consciousness, same. Even if it is a matrix, it's still a matrix in which we believe that the universe in which we find ourselves, consciousness is a key part. So, with all of that, I was thinking perhaps if we pass a tipping point, say, amongst the alive kind of souls we've got going around that can realize the self awareness of the universe, consciousness as a basic thing, that maybe at that point enough people would get it so that we are starting to use that kind of language as a species wide, perhaps, that would allow us to make maybe some actual neurological leaps that we can't right now because we just aren't there, and because most, well, not most, that's judgy. I have the sense that a lot of folks would rather not, they just don't want to be awake, and that's their prerogative. But anyway, uh so I believe, oh, jumping, this I think is sort of seems to be my Skyfire kind of persona thing, complete with little dragon ruff up here. Anyway, so back over to the spiritual DNA, and I'm putting that in quotes because, although it could be really in the organic DNA that our organic somatic selves carry, but there's a lot that in we don't seem to quite yet understand what all stuff does, all the different RNA and what's going on in there, that perhaps on a spiritual, so multidimensional level, if you think of, oh, well, I've been around these people and I feel like actual switches have been flipped. And I'm just putting that here because this one is actually mostly for the women who's, and, well, women and men, the people for whom when I'm plugged into you, you just have flipped these amazing switches in me. So primarily, that's my cousin Matthew, Hillary, Brittany, and Ashtara Ren. You guys are the main ones that have just flipped all those switches. Anyway, anyway, uh, thinking, well, just basically say beyond three dimensionally, just other dimensionally, about that there could be energetic attributes to what we kind of think of as latent parts to our DNA. And just because we can't really measure what it does doesn't mean it doesn't do something. I mean, we know we don't see most of the light spectrum, but the rest of the light spectrum is there. We just because we don't have the tools doesn't mean something isn't there. In fact, most of the time there's more stuff there. We just haven't seen it yet. So that's really I mean, we can Occam's razor the whole universe, which is okay. It could be a matrix. Occam's razor, which seems to be built into the universe in which we find ourselves, says the simplest path is always it. So it probably is not. The reality I see is the reality which is created in the whatever in my brain. It is all consciousness. It can't be anything else based on the physics of the universe in which I find myself. That's a lot of physics. The spiritual stuff I realize I get in very science format. I don't know, well, for whatever reason, a lot of it comes that way. And so thank you for any of you who watch any of these things because as my friend Jen says that half the time I'm talking and I don't sound like I'm making any sense whatsoever. But if it is making sense to you, then great, because then it means you're there with me and something in the tones or the wavelength or the whatever is echoing in the words you're getting behind it, behind the curtain part. That's where the woo is. But I also get a lot of the stuff by math. Like I've realized, oh, there are seraphic mathematicians, or what I'm calling seraphic mathematicians. And I think I'm actually one of them, or I'm supposed to help find out who's gonna kind of get some wave going of this concept of a new kind of quantum math that would allow us to have a language to describe consciousness, or maybe even tie consciousness to math the way we use math. Anyway, that seems important, or the idea that I want somebody else to be looking for that kind of thing, or if I can just get that concept in the zeitgeist, maybe that's my part. And yeah, that kind of sounds very hero's journey-ish. And that's really, as a species, that's what we do. We are, I think, well, here's something else. Boy, I just jump around. A couple of years ago, I'd had this idea that really, if we were able to evolve, that we would be not Homo sapiens sapiens, but a Homo storyteller. That we realize that we literally are dreaming our realities into the now, that the eternal, and but that um, there literally are dream keepers. Like, I think, well, in the universe in which I find myself, it doesn't break physics that we know of that there could be like lineage DNA that is a kind of spiritual or multidimensional kind of memory aspect from consciousness as having evolved somewhere else in this universe. So, kind of that's the sciencey way of the I have lineage in this binary star system, or I like binary stars. Therefore, in the story I get to tell myself, that means that maybe as I recognize how vast and complex complex this universe is, there could be sort of quantum memory entanglement, something something of a consciousness that did arise back in what we would call the past, like at a different point, or maybe it is in the future. I mean, in physics, time forward back doesn't matter. It matters at our level, but maybe at that level of multidimensional DNA, for lack of something else to call it. I don't know. I need a language. I need a language for this. I will have some Diet Cola and think. Well, let's just say that after you've come to the day that you look in the mirror and you recognize, oh, I really am part of something that is much greater than the somatic experience I also find myself in. I am both observer in the eternal part of myself and the observed, living it at the same time. So once you've kind of settled into that groove of I am observer and observed, I keep just thinking if enough of us get there that we'll be able to talk to each other about, hey, so how about we start driving before this species just does itself in and we have to make new memories on some other part of the universe. I mean, and that's species saving is, I mean, that's the ultimate hero's journey and sounds really ridiculous for me to talk like that. Like, I mean, it's a messianic message of, "Hey, let's save ourselves because we can do it better." I don't wanna be anybody's messiah, don't get me wrong, or let me be very clear, I'm nobody's messiah. I just realized it is messianic messaging in a way of, "Hey, if you wake up, you can take more control over the experience you find yourself in, but recognize the only experience you will ever know is what you're actually having in the moment," which the brains here are super, super complicated, and it's still a concept that kind of makes our brains wanna break, so perhaps understanding the full complexity of the universe does better in a different organic form, maybe a methane breather or something, I don't know. But I'm in this one, which seems to be carbon-based. Now I just sound like I'm an alien inhabiting a body, but I've gotta say for the past few days, that's really what I felt like. I was writing to my friend Jen and just saying, "I don't feel tethered right now." I just feel I'm watching Netflix and relationship shows, and I'm not seeing them as human beings in a weird reality show. I'm seeing them as individuations of consciousness. I'm like, "How weird that they want to communicate." I'm like, "Well, what is the purpose?" And then I was like, "Oh, lordy." So I was taking some more cannabis thinking, well, maybe that will just slow everything down, but instead it just gives me more of the woo. But that's okay. So that's why I'm doing this live stream. I hadn't talked about things for a while. So I think it'd be really cool, and I love the idea, and I don't think it breaks physics to have multidimensional sort of DNA spiritual legacy kind of, so like almost memory or future memories, because again, time forward, backward, time is just right. Oh, time is time breaks everybody's brain. All right, so let me get out of there. That's a rabbit hole I've been in for a while. I haven't been feeling particularly actually human. I've just been feeling like, oh, I'm this collection of an a shard of an individuation of a self-aware universe, which doesn't seem to fit kind of what I'm looking at and what I'm in. Which could also sound like a psychic break. So I'm putting this out here, trusting that, well, if anybody thinks that I am in danger of hurting myself or others, you will report me. I mostly think it just means that I'm recognizing what it really feels like to have a spiritual experience, which is of like, oh, yeah, no, it really, physics would break without it being in an ever when interstitial always now kind of thing, because all of the math that either we've created or has found us as its own math might be a conscious entity for all we know. It's pretty amazing. It does a really great job of describing what's around. So if you have to have someone to make you aware, if someone has to be aware of you for you to exist, you would want to put as many tools in front of them as possible, right? So that sounds super woo, but also hopefully, well, hopefully not too far out there. But yeah, I have felt not exactly human. Maybe seraphic is the best way to describe it. It's like I've been more feeling like the observer than the observed, which, okay, now that I think about it like that is fine. Okay. Like everything else in this universe is pretty much a wave function. Everything seems to come down to a wave function and ripples and all of that. So perhaps ultimately as a sine wave between observer observed, observer observed is recognizing that sometimes those waves may be really fast, sometimes they may be really slow. And if I've been in a real wave of, oh, existentially, am I a real thing? That's okay. I'll cycle back over into, yeah, and I really just want to put my face in a bunch of chocolate and bacon. So, and yeah, the whole job thing and real life. So with all that, that was quite a ramble, but If you have any questions or want me to elaborate on anything, feel free. I believe, kind of in short, there are actual human beings that I would call either, well, dream keepers and or seraphic mathematicians. Think I'm one of those, kind of in this whole binary 11 living binary of the 1 and 2 versus a 0 and 1 of um, base data points. It's almost like a spiritual, like 0, 1 for our digital world, that 1 and 2 is for the metaphysical world. You could kind of use the same, just a multi-dimensional binary system. I'll put that in another video. But I've had all these kind of math things, like big old math crush in my spiritual and metaphysical world with the number 11 and 111 and things like that. Anyway, so I will now stop. Anybody who watched any of this, wow, thrilled to have you here, because if any of this makes sense to you, then you're somebody like me. That's really great. Uh, let's have fun hanging out in the metaphysical aurora. All right. Bye.